It's the CBT Nugget series for ITIL Foundations. I'm Chris Ward, and today we're going to take a look at part of our service transition lifecycle stage. In this particular process is going to be transition planning and support. Unlike a lot of the other processes where it's talking about the service itself, this particular process is going to focus on the transitioning of that service and not the service. So there are elements of the service that we're talking about, whether it's offering a new coffee drink at Acme Coffee or whether it's rolling out a brand new operating system for your entire 10,000 member company. Either way, you're talking about what is the plan in order to help make that transition. As we jump into the very first process for service transition, which is of course going to be transition planning and support, I, as a project manager, am very fond of this particular area. Someone once wisely said, in order to do, you must plan. You must plan in order to do. If you are going to put together this transition to get from that design phase into operations, to get that service, whether it's being changed or updated, or maybe it's a brand new service, rolling it out, we need to make sure that we have a plan in place on how we're going to get from A to B. And we also need to make sure that there is support in place for that. In other words, it's not like you try to flip all the switches and if it works, great. If it doesn't, that's not so great. So let's take a look at transition planning and support. When you start talking about service transition, and especially transition planning and support, the thing that immediately pops into my mind is think about when you were learning how to ride your bike, especially when you didn't have the training wheels on. And I would say that there were obviously different steps that took you from riding a bike with training wheels eventually all the way up to not having to do it. Maybe even you were that scary person who says, "Look, Ma, no hands," and you could ride your bike without your hands. I could do that, and my mom thought I was crazy, but that's okay. It's just something that we do, right, as when we're kids. But as you can see, that as you move those, move through that training, the first is a bike to provide transportation. Well, somebody's going to at least need to start off with some sort of support. That would be the training wheels. And then as they move on, remember, you would go ahead and grab on and you'd kind of hold on to the back and you'd let your kids kind of gently make their way down the road until eventually they're like, let go, let go. Or in the beginning, my kids were always like, don't let go, don't let go. And we need to be able to do that. So service transition for our transition planning and support is defined here in our service transition lifecycle book as to provide overall planning for the service transitions and to coordinate the resources that they require. That's that support thing. A couple of terms that we do need to know and we want to concentrate on, especially we'll talk about this in the next whiteboard, is the release policy itself. There are basically three types of releases that we need to identify and have policies in place for. We need to know about the service design package lifecycle and how that works. Remember that the SDP gives us all the information that we are going to need for our service transition teams. We're going to have the service charter, which is going to include a description of whatever the utility and warranty is for that service. We're going to probably have our budgets, some time scales. We're going to have service models, probably the definition and design of each one of these type of releases that we are going to utilize, as we're talking about here with the release policy. And to understand that you want to be able to increase the ability of a service provider in handling the change and releases through that service and make sure that the customers are happy with that. That's why the integration of these things, not only planning for the transition, but making sure that they have what they need in order to succeed. Because we're talking about planning here, transition planning, there obviously are going to be several policies that are in place. There is, of course, the overall service transition policy that is going to include things from your change management policies, your service asset and configuration management, release and deployment management, which we're going to talk about a little bit later on. But one that we do want to point out here from an exam standpoint is, of course, going to be the release policy. The release policy can basically be made up of different types of service assets that are going to have people from maybe different organizations, and they're going to have responsibilities for the handover and acceptance of the release. And we need to make sure that everybody is on the same page. So what you would want to do is typically, or you're going to put together these different types of release policies based upon the different, I would say, sizes or urgencies of the releases. Now, the three that they are identified in the ITIL lifecycle books is, first off, the major releases. So this is going to contain typically a lot of new functionality, some of which may eliminate maybe just a band-aid that you've put on a problem or something like that. Maybe a major upgrade or release that's going to supersede all of the other preceding upgrades that maybe are minor upgrades that you've done in the past. This is going to be essentially a full operating system, okay? So, like, remember how you had Windows 8? And then they had Windows, right, 8.1. So what we're talking about is now the latest one coming out as of the recording of this Nugget series is Windows 10. That's a major release. Now, point 1, guess what? That is a minor release. Minor releases are going to have your small enhancements and probably fixes. We all know about some of those fixes, right, that we had to need in 8.1 in our Windows operating system. And this is going to pretty much be something that are maybe a collection of bug fixes or anything like that, and those are typically going to be handled over here under emergency releases. These are going to be your updates, right? And usually security. If we're just talking, and by the way, I'm just using this as the reference here, as the Windows, the security updates and patches that you're going to have. So security patches. These would be emergency releases. Obviously, these are going to be corrections to meet a high priority business requirement, and you're going to need to get it done within a 24-hour period or a couple of day period, whereas minor releases, that might be over a month or two, whereas major releases might take a year, maybe 2 years, maybe even more to get that out to the people. So if you think about it, and we look at it from the standpoint of Acme Coffee here, let's say that we are going to be releasing a new coffee beverage, okay? So that is going to be something that is going to be more of a minor release. Why is that? Well, think about it. We already have an espresso machine. We already have the drip coffee. We already have the elements in place. So to update to maybe a new flavor or a new type of drink, like, for example, I know Starbucks is finally jumping on board what my UK friends and family already know about, and that are flat whites. Amazing drinks. Love those. My favorite ones. Well, that wasn't just something, unless you went to like a boutique coffee shop like Acme Coffee, you really didn't get those. But when I was over in England for a long time, I definitely was like, man, why don't we have these? These are great. And so it was kind of cool. But that's a minor release because you've got the milk and you've got the espresso or coffee, and so you're able to do that. Then a major release is what we've talked about in another nugget, where we say Acme Coffee and Wine Bar, right? And when you do that, that's going to be a major release. And so obviously there's going to be a lot more information placed in your release policy and support that you're going to need. Another thing that your transition planning and support is going to need to focus on, and actually this is going to kind of happen all the way throughout the rest of these processes, is dealing with information management. You're going to be making heavy use of this, and we're not going to get into detail in this nugget because one nugget, knowledge management, is all about the SKMS. That is the Service Knowledge Management System. So just here, I'll write it out for you. So there you go, the Service Knowledge Management System. This is going to contain all kinds of information. You're going to have your guidelines, your standards, your models, the plans, all documents that you are going to create and maintain by, not only service design packages, it could be your OLAs, those operational level agreements, and process documentation. The big thing that you need to know for transition planning and support as it relates to this is it needs to be up to date. That's how you support a good transition. That's how you plan for it. In other words, make sure that communication is occurring. All the service transition processes are going to need to be coordinated, right, by the transition planning and support. So you must have access to that service knowledge. And if you don't, then it's going to make it a lot harder. You might also need access to the service acceptance criteria, the SAC, service acceptance criteria. Obviously, if you're releasing this eventually and you want to plan for this this transition to be successful, you want to make sure that you have access to what is the acceptance for that transition, or this service, I should say, to finally be okayed and put into operation. So just something that we need to do. So you need to store that information in the SKMS. You need a management, or it needs to be managed through the change management and the change management system. So all these things are going to work together to help us have a successful transition. Plan in order to do. In order to do, you must plan. So we took a look at this one, our very first of our processes. We've got some more exciting ones coming up. Glad you could join me today for our nugget. I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.